Hi and welcome to the Bible Standard. Can there ever be peace in Israel? Well, we have an insightful and expositional Bible study for you now, examining one of the world's most complex questions. This thought-provoking presentation moves beyond the headlines and political commentary to explore the history of Israel and Palestine through the lens of Bible prophecy. We trace the scriptural promises for the future of the region, revealing the profound link between righteousness and peace. Discover the outstanding hope of the Bible and the ultimate solution for lasting peace that it offers, that transcends human treaties and agreements. Join us now for this revealing study, and don't forget to like, share and subscribe, and drop us a comment with your thoughts. We'd love to hear from you.
Start with a very brief reference from Jeremiah chapter 31. Can there ever be peace in Israel? From the Bible's perspective. So Jeremiah 31 speaks to us of the time when God will change from having exiled his people from their land and go and gather them again. And my generation and the generation before have seen the results of that in the people of Israel, the Jews, having been regathered and establishing once again a nation of Israel. But when we think about whether there can ever be peace in Israel, I think we need to start with the words of Jeremiah 31 and verse 31 in our minds. Behold, the days are coming, declares the Lord, when I will make a new covenant with the house of Israel and the house of Judah, not like the covenant that I made with their fathers on the day when I took them by the hand to bring them out of the land of Egypt, my covenant that they broke, though I was their husband, declares the Lord. But this is the covenant that I will make with the house of Israel after those days, declares the Lord. I will put my law within them, and I will write it on their hearts, and I will be their God, and they shall be my people. Now that doesn't say anything to us about peace, does it? And we'll explore that further as we go on. But what it does do, it tells us that the people of Israel will be made right in their relationship with their God. His laws will be on their hearts. And as we explore this topic, I hope you'll come to agree with me that having the law of God on their hearts and being at peace are in fact linked very strongly. The land we know as Palestine or Israel has had a long and painful history. Many different peoples have been in control of the land, starting as far back as 3000 BC, it appears. The Jews controlled the land for about 1100 years between 1400 BC and 65 BC, with about 250 years of that time where other powers were in control. The Romans, the Muslims, the Crusaders, the Turks and the British then all had their turn until the establishment of the nation of Israel in 1948. The land of Israel or Palestine has been one which has been fought over for millennia. But what about the city of Jerusalem? It has been around in various forms for almost the entire time from 3000 BC on. It's been attacked, besieged, captured, recaptured, almost more times than can be counted. I put up on the board 52, but I suspect that is pretty much a guess on the part of the historians. It's a fairly well accepted figure, but there's a lot of history there, isn't there? It has been completely destroyed twice, yet it remains today as a problem for most of the world. In fact, the Bible calls it a burdensome stone. Modern Israel was declared as a nation in May 1948. And they were immediately at war because the nations around them were convinced that they could not allow the nation to take root. Well, they tried and they failed. And then again in 1967 and again in 1973, Israel were at war with their Arab neighbours. And each time the war was won. And each time the UN have passed resolutions about how to deal with the situation that has been presented to them. And each time peace eluded the whole region. And the unrest continued through the 70s and the 80s, with many countries trying to have a part in bringing peace. And we know from the history books that nothing worked. Ownership of the West Bank and the Gaza Strip, and we can probably add in there the Golan Heights, and the way those regions were going to be used has continued to be an issue. And almost every nation seems to have their own agenda for what should happen. It's quite surprising, really. 6,000 square kilometres, much less than the area of Melbourne. 6,000 square kilometres. It's got nothing particularly to recommend it, but everyone wants to decide what to do with it, and no one has come up with workable reasons or workable methods for bringing about peace. And that continued on through the 1990s. And when you add in East Jerusalem onto the agenda, you have a mix that none of the nations in the Middle East could resist, nor could the major superpowers of the world. But it adds up to a lot more casualties and, unfortunately, no peaceful answers, all leading, unfortunately, to lots of fingers being pointed at lots of different people, but no peace. Finally, in 2002, 2003, George Bush put forward what he called the roadmap for peace. And it got really powerful backing from the US, from the UN, the EU, Russia. It all called for quite significant changes to the way Israel was settling the disputed areas. It called for reforms in both Israel and Palestinian policies. And it all took a couple of years to start to be engaged upon. But it didn't get very far because 11 years after the initial suggestion, the negotiations between Israel and the Palestinians hit rock bottom and finally collapsed completely. The last 10 years have been a mixed bag in terms of diplomatic and political successes in the area. The US and some nations have finally recognised Jerusalem as the capital of Israel, but they were greeted with loud cries of condemnation from lots of nations around the world. Diplomatic relations between Israel and some of the surrounding nations have been normalised. It appeared that peace might be possible. And then Hamas happened. They decided enough was enough and began to escalate tensions between themselves and Israel, who, by the way, were more than happy to enter into that escalation. But it all culminated, didn't it, in the October 2023 attack on Israel, with hostages being taken, and an ongoing war with Israel that has resulted in the almost total destruction of Gaza, and the death of more than 60,000 people, most of them civilians. And the world response was for many countries to decide to officially recognise the Palestinian state. I have a feeling Hamas probably sees this as a win, while they forget the ongoing famine in their land and the deaths their decisions and the decisions of Israel and the decisions of other nations have caused. So what's the current situation in Israel and Palestine? We've gone through that general history quite quickly, haven't we? 5,000 years of history in 10 minutes. But it has been one where peace has not been very obvious. Not at any stage, really. And there are 5 areas that I think we need to look at briefly to consider exactly what the situation is that is facing that area of the world today. So let's think about this slogan that Hamas uses to indicate that their aim is to remove the nation of Israel from the map. There are some who have tried to turn this into a more sensible usage. You might have heard of the UK Labour MP, Andy MacDonald, who said, "We won't rest until we have justice, until all people, Israelis and Palestinians, between the river and the sea, can live in peaceful liberty." And that got him sacked. Well, what does Hamas think about it? Their constitution from 2017 contained this sentence: Hamas rejects any alternative to the full and complete liberation of Palestine from the river to the sea. And I suppose you could say that that would be a form of peace. But of course it hasn't happened, has it? In fact, from the river to the sea has become a war cry rather than a seeking for peace. During the time since October 7, there have been anti-Semitic acts occurring at a far greater rate, or that's how it would appear. Interestingly, the stats don't show that. They just show that they are perhaps more violent. These stats are old. They're 10 years out of date. But they do show very disturbingly that a quarter of the world's population, and this boggled my mind, from 1 billion people being asked, a quarter of them replied that they were anti-Semitic. That's taken from the ADL website. Further stats from their website. So the ADL is the Anti-Defamation League. It is a New York-based, and I will say, Jewish-started international non-governmental organisation. In 2024, they report 9,354 anti-Semitic incidents across the United States. That represents a 5% increase from the 8,873 incidents recorded in 2023. Those stats aren't consistent across the world because there are certainly areas where the number of anti-Semitic acts has gone down. Nevertheless, it's a really disturbing trend. Hand in hand with that has been the support for the Palestinian state. Of course, the original UN plan, which allowed the people of Israel to establish an independent state, included a petition for a Palestinian state. And they did declare independence in the West Bank in 1988. In fact, over 140 countries in the UN recognise the Palestinian state. And France, the UK, Canada, and Australia have all indicated that they will, at the UN meeting next month, put forward their support for the Palestinian state. And there have been demonstrations around the world in support, all caused by an act of terrorism in October 2023. None of this is calculated to bring peace to the region. After all, the agreed upon partitions of the land are completely indefensible for Israel. I suppose you could say that they're indefensible for the Palestinians as well, except that they have a lot of backing in the region. Israel, on the other hand, are surrounded by implacable enemies. That's what was shown in October 2023. The war between Gaza and Israel, and I'd suggest that is the correct way to put it, because Hamas in Gaza were clearly the aggressors, but they are no longer the only aggressor. And it has brought terrible hardship to the region. 251 hostages were taken on October 7, and it's believed that of the 49 still in captivity, only 21 still live. Almost 1,200 people were killed in Israel on that day, and the numbers since then show that about 62,000 Palestinians have been killed, while almost 2,000 Israelis have been killed. Israel appears to accept the number of the number of Palestinian deaths, although they don't accept the different numbers of women and children who have been purportedly killed. There is one thing, though, that again can be stated quite plainly. There is no prospect of peace in the region anytime soon. Part of the reason for that is Iran's support of Hamas and Hezbollah. They support everything that Hamas and Hezbollah are doing with all sorts of aid. We could ask why they do it. Because both groups don't operate anywhere near Iran. The answer, unfortunately, appears to be quite simple. They support these terror groups in the hope that they will be able to hurt Israel.
I agree.
And they do it in every possible way they can, including financially. It's hard to work out exactly how much support Iran gives, but it is definitely hundreds of millions of dollars every year that are pumped into the support of both Hamas and Hezbollah. And Hezbollah paints the picture that the funding of Hezbollah comes from Lebanese business groups, private persons, businessmen, the Lebanese diaspora involved in the African diamond exploration, other Islamic groups and countries, and the taxes paid by the Shia Lebanese. They say that most of its income comes from its own investment portfolios and donations by Muslims. Unfortunately, from everything I could find out, that seems to be a complete fabrication. Iran gives hundreds of millions of dollars to these and to other terror groups because they want to hurt Israel and can't or won't do it openly themselves. So if we try to take stock of the situation in the Middle East today, I think this quote from the conversation gives what looks like a pretty reasonable summary. By more than 1,000 years, Israel predates Palestine. The land then became home primarily to an Arab population, again for more than a millennium. Both Jews and Arabs thus have a legitimate claim to the land. The Israeli-Palestinian conflict has seen myriad wrongs and brutalities on both sides. No acts of vengeance, however extreme, could now allow one party to say that accounts have been settled on their side. The only way forward is somehow to cease looking backwards. In an inversion of the Nile's transformation in the Bible, the rivers of blood spilled must become water under the bridge. And from a secular perspective, this seems a very balanced approach. It's clear that they are trying to work out a way to peace. It would be nice to see it work out that way, but history would suggest that that's not possible. And thankfully, we have the Bible to give us God's answer, because it tells us that it will only happen in one way. The other thing the Bible gives us is a perspective that is eerily similar to what we see today. Look at this quote. "Too long have I had my dwelling among those who hate peace. I am for peace, but when I speak, they are for war." I have a feeling that both sides of the current argument would probably say that that is their feeling. I think that Israel's UN representative feels like this all the time. So what hope for a peace coming from our politicians? I would suggest that there is no hope at all. That, of course, is a very gloomy picture, isn't it? So has there ever been peace in Israel? I mentioned earlier that when you look at the history, it doesn't look like it. There was a brief period of time when we're told that there was peace in Israel, in the time of King Solomon, enough to have it noted in the Bible as a promise from God. God said to David that his son Solomon would get peace and quiet in Israel all his days, as long as he did what was right. And for the time that he did, that's exactly what happened. But Solomon didn't even end up with peace until the end of his reign. 40 years, and he couldn't maintain his service to God. And that was the situation throughout the rest of the time of the monarchy in both the northern and southern kingdoms of Israel in those days back around 900 to 600 BC. It is interesting to look at a quote from the Psalms and see the message it gives about peace. It's not that peace was considered impossible, simply that it was recognised that it relied on good behaviour from God's perspective. Do good, O Lord, to those who are good, and to those who are upright in their hearts. But those who turn aside to their crooked ways, the Lord will lead away with evildoers. Peace be upon Israel. It's clear that the ones who went away from God's law would not be part of that peace upon Israel. And the fascinating thing is that the message of the gospel is exactly the same. Importantly, peace is once more a part of the discussion, because peace was part of the gospel. So we read from Acts, "As for the word that he sent to Israel, preaching good news of peace through Jesus Christ, he is Lord of all." And again in Galatians, "As for all who walk by this rule, peace and mercy be upon them, and upon the Israel of God." Now that's not a new message, and we should never think it was. The New Testament gives details of the new covenant that God wanted to establish, but his requirements were not new.
Correct.
Let's look at a few verses from the law of Moses. In Leviticus 25 and verse 18 we read, "Therefore you shall do my statutes and keep my rules and perform them, and then you shall dwell in the land securely. The land will yield its fruit, and you will eat your fill and dwell in it securely." So again, the point comes through loud and clear. Do things God's way, and you'll dwell securely, safely, peacefully. But if you don't, then we can really see what the result would be. It's clear that God's intention would be to remove them from the land. Remember what that psalm said, that he would take them aside and put them with the evildoers. A little further on in the next chapter, these ideas are stated again. "If you walk in my statutes and observe my commandments and do them, at the end you shall eat your bread to the full and dwell in your land securely." So both in the Old Testament and the New Testament, God promises peace and safety to people who obey his commandments. And there are prophecies which make it really clear that that is what we can expect in the land of Israel. So for the rest of the time, I want to look at what the Bible tells us about the end game, if you like, for God's people, Israel. We're going to start in the book of Isaiah. God, through Isaiah, shows how disappointed he was in those days, and that was about 700 BC, that his people had turned their backs on his commandments because the result was warfare and exile. And he makes it clear that if they had obeyed, things would have been different. "Oh, that thou hadst hearkened to my commandments, then had thy peace been as a river, and thy righteousness as the waves of the sea. Your offspring would have been like the sand, and your descendants like its grains. Their name would never be cut off or destroyed from before me." If they had hearkened to his commandments, then these wonderful things would have happened. And what we have today, what's that, 2,700 years later, is a history that we've gone through which shows exactly the same lack of peace in that country throughout the entire time. So how could peace be established in Israel? Well, Ezekiel 37 commences with a prophecy of the Jews being regathered into the land promised to their fathers, the land of Israel. And that started to be fulfilled in 1947, 1948. And it continues as we watch their history. It's not all smooth sailing, but the end of the chapter describes where God intends that it will all end. He tells us clearly in verse 26, "Moreover, I will make a covenant of peace with them. It shall be an everlasting covenant with them. And I will place them and multiply them and will set my sanctuary in the midst of them for evermore." So perhaps now we have an answer to our question. Can there ever be peace in Israel? Yes, there will be peace in Israel. But as we look further into what God has promised, we see a really interesting thing. Peace is not going to come on its own. In fact, the verses we looked at previously about the sort of behaviour God required before he would give peace are backed up with lots of other verses that we reveal a deeper truth. It talks about peace and righteousness, and they are linked together in God's plan for his people and for the whole earth. And so in Psalm 72 we read, "Give the king thy judgments, O God, and thy righteousness unto the king's son. He shall judge thy people with righteousness and thy poor with judgment. The mountains shall bring peace to the people, and the little hills by righteousness." Again, we have a very similar message in Psalm 85. "Show us thy mercy, O Lord, and grant us thy salvation. I will hear what God the Lord will speak, for he will speak peace unto his people." In verse 10, "Mercy and truth are met together. Righteousness and peace have kissed each other." And so as we work through what God has sent in his word about peace, and particularly peace in Israel, we see a real linkage between peace granted by God and the lives that the people who are granted peace have lived as they take on righteousness. We move on to the message of Isaiah. We can see that the promise of an everlasting kingdom that is described so clearly in places like Daniel 2 and Micah 4 are also a part of the means by which God will bring peace for his people, a peace that will fill not just Israel, but the whole world. In Isaiah 32 and verse 1 we read, "Behold, a king shall reign in righteousness, and princes shall rule in judgment." And making no apologies to any of the kings who have been recorded in the Bible, none of them actually reigned completely in righteousness. But one is coming who will. And when that king, the Lord Jesus Christ, reigns, he will reign in righteousness. And the result is what we read in verses 17 and 18. "And the work of righteousness shall be peace, and the effect of righteousness, quietness and assurance forever. And my people shall dwell in a peaceable habitation, and in sure dwellings, and in quiet resting places." There are many other places in the prophecies of the Old Testament that lead us exactly along this path. But it is also the message of the New Testament as well. In Romans 14, "For the kingdom of God is not meat and drink," although there will be meat and drink in the kingdom, "but it is righteousness and peace and joy in the Holy Spirit." And again in James chapter 3, James repeats the message that Jesus had told his followers very early on when he said that the peacemakers would be blessed. And here his brother remembers and broadens the idea to remind us all of the way we should be living. But the wisdom from above is first pure, then peaceable, gentle, open to reason, full of mercy and good fruits, impartial and sincere. And the fruit of righteousness is sown in peace of them that make peace. We look for peace in the Middle East. We look for peace, don't we, everywhere. But particularly we look for it for God's people. And he has said that he has chosen Israel as his people. Well, can there ever be peace in Israel? The answer is a resounding yes. What we should remember, though, is that it won't be by any human endeavour. It's not going to come from peace talks. It's not going to come from treaties. It won't come by Israel and her enemies being browbeaten into doing what they should be doing. The Bible, in fact, gives us the answer. There will be peace in Israel, and the prophecies are totally clear on that. And the way that that peace will come is because God sent his Son, and of his Son, God said in prophecy that he would be called the Prince of Peace. And in Isaiah 9 and verse 7, of the increase of his government and of peace there will be no end, on the throne of David and over his kingdom, to establish it and to uphold it with justice and with righteousness from this time forth and forevermore. The zeal of the Lord of hosts will do this. I want to finish by quoting from the 2nd chapter of Isaiah. These words speak of a kingdom which will enforce peace over the whole world. And I want to read with you from Isaiah chapter 2 and verse 2. It shall come to pass in the latter days that the mountain of the house of the Lord shall be established as the highest of the mountains, and shall be lifted up above the hills. And all the nations shall flow to it, and many people shall come and say, Come, let us go up to the mountain of the Lord, to the house of the God of Jacob, for he shall teach us his ways, and that we may walk in his paths. For out of Zion shall go forth the law, and the word of the Lord from Jerusalem. He shall judge between the nations, and shall decide disputes for many peoples, and they shall beat their swords into plowshares, and their spears into pruning hooks. Nation shall not lift up war against nation, neither shall they learn war any more. The Prince of Peace will come, and he will fulfill the prophecy that the UN have on their wall, which they would love to be able to bring to pass, but which they must rely on the God of heaven sending his Son back to this earth to fulfill. Because of the increase of his government and of peace, there will be no end in Israel or anywhere in this world.
Don't forget to hit that like button. It really helps the channel grow. Drop a comment in the comment section and let us know what you thought. And make sure you subscribe and turn on notifications so you never miss a new upload. Please share it and spread the word. Thanks for watching, and remember to come back soon.